Here's a quick shout out to my paid supporters: Jinkans, Dan Rogers, Elise Pullen, Tomion, Clyde's Music. Yuffie's mission against Shinra is not simply a battle against environmental destruction, but a fight for Wutai's soul. The original FF7 does not depict the people of Wutai as actively political or revolutionary in the same way that they're depicted in the remake. Instead, Wutai in the original game is a defeated nation, subdued, commercialized, and resigned to its post-war role as a tourist destination. Wutai is more than just a normal JRPG town that you may or may not stumble across. It's a former nation with its own culture and history. In many ways, ancient Wutai is Midgar's perfect foil, a contrast to rapid industrialization and the soul-crushing corporatism that slowly robbed the lives of Midgar's residents of all meaning. But the Wutai that exists at the time of FF7 has changed. Over the course of Yuffie's life, she's witnessed Wutai's transformation from a culturally rich and independent state to a Disneyfied version of itself. A hollow tourist attraction sold as an exotic experience for outsiders, and yet Wutai's old wooden buildings still stand as silent reminders of a lost golden age. A quiet looming tower, a glimmering statue of a local deity, hidden backrooms where closed literary classics gather dust, and on the floor, what may be the final work of a calligraphy master laid out to dry. With shining glimpses of a disappearing golden age scattered among brightly colored ticket booths and tourist attractions, how did Wutai come to be in such a state? And what does this say about the story of FF7? The guardian deity of Wutai is Leviathan. In the famous philosophical work Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, the state is depicted on the frontispiece as a massive sea monster of ancient Near Eastern origins. The Leviathan was Hobbes' metaphor for the state. His argument was that individuals could protect themselves from the dangers of the natural world and each other by agreeing to a social contract, which, in exchange for loss of freedom, would grant peace and security. In the frontispiece, we can see that Leviathan's power is composed of people's submission, without which, according to Hobbes, there would be a war of all against all. In my view, the Leviathan of Wutai becomes a powerful symbol of forced compromise in exchange for survival. The side quest in which Wutai's story is told occurs in the original FF7. Yuffie, a Wutai native, returns home and is suddenly forced to confront the resentment she feels toward her father following the compromises he made with Shinra. Compromises that turned Wutai into something like an enormous theme park for Midgar's rich and famous. The side quest can be activated after escaping from Rocket Town via the Tiny Bronco if players get too close to Wutai and if Yuffie has been previously recruited. There are two narrative arcs to this side quest. Part 1 is defined by the homecoming itself. Yuffie returns to Wutai after having stolen the party's materia, which she hopes to use in a personal battle against Shinra. However, she's kidnapped by Midgar's crime lord, Don Corneo, who's hiding out in Wutai while things cool off for him back home. The final confrontation against Don Corneo takes place on top of a giant statue of Wutai's ancient local deity, emphasizing the devaluation of Wutai's cultural legacy. Its history is literally being stepped on and walked over. Once Yuffie is saved, she returns to the party and opens up the possibility of completing Part 2 of the side quest, in which she faces her past and comes to terms with the actions of her father, Godo. If Part 1 is about conflict and confrontation, Part 2 is about trials leading to resolution, in a ritual involving 5 solo battles. Each victory brings Yuffie closer to heaven, symbolized by her ascent to the next floor of the pagoda. A curious aspect of the pagoda battles is that the names of Yuffie's enemies are all theater references. Gorky, for Maxim Gorky, Sheik, for Shakespeare, Chekhov, for Anton Chekhov, and Staniv, for Stanislavski. Godo, Yuffie's father, is the only one not explicitly named after a real-life theater figure. But given the connection between the other names and the stage, it may not be too far of a stretch to imagine that Godo symbolizes the Godo of Samuel Beckett's masterpiece, Waiting for Godot. In Japanese, Godo and Godo are written the same, and given the theatrical context surrounding the other names, I find it hard to believe that the allusions are accidental. The references may simply be there for flavor, like Biggs and Wedge being Star Wars nods, but another possibility is that the writers intended them to mean something. The play Waiting for Godot is often interpreted as a metaphor for waiting for something extremely important that never comes, like the restoration of Wutai's former dignity and glory. Godo himself can be seen hanging around in the backrooms of Wutai's ancient mansion, waiting in vain for a catharsis. Interestingly, I found other fans discussing this connection on an FF7 message board. Clement Rage wrote in 2021, "The point of Godot is that it has no point, which is either a very clever troll or a happy coincidence." On the same message board, another user, Obsidian Fire, pointed out that because Wutai is no longer what it used to be, the nation as a whole is acting out their own culture on a stage. If Godot is a play about waiting for something that never happens, then Yuffie's Godot is Wutai's redemption. Part of her character development is realizing that this redemption may never come. There is no happy ending for Wutai. Its golden age is fading, and the flame of glory is not to be relit. Wutai's culture, now reduced to embers, has nothing left by which to catch fire and come back to life. What it needs is a renaissance, a rebirth, but there's no energy left. The culture has become tired and worn out, and perhaps it's an unfortunate truth. Fortunes do not always turn as on a wheel to bring those at the bottom back up to the top. And yet, the people of Wutai survive. Maybe the glory days can't come back, but at least Yuffie's father has given the people something by which to earn a livelihood and feed themselves. They haven't been swallowed up completely by the rest of the planet's nightmarish poverty, so in a sense, the people of Wutai are still somewhat autonomous. Wutai's condition as a tourist attraction is the equivalent of playing dead in the face of an unconquerable enemy. In the words of Godo, the reason I hide my strength now is also for the good of Wutai. In other words, Wutai has been forced into putting on a show of non-threatening servility in the face of Midgar's tourists. There's actually a real-world analogy to this, the history of Okinawa, once known as the Ryukyu Kingdom. For centuries, Okinawa was a small island nation caught between two massive powers, China and Japan. The Okinawa kings bowed to China in elaborate tribute missions while secretly answering to Japan behind the scenes. By appearing weak and non-threatening, they preserved their language, religion, and culture for hundreds of years. They also pretended to be ignorant when it suited them. Gregory Smits writes in Visions of Ryukyu on page 28 that when some of the Okinawans were making a trip to Edo, they were under instructions to feign ignorance of Japanese language and customs while en route. Wutai is doing something similar. Its buildings, its customs, and its people are hidden behind the polite performance of a peaceful resort town. It's not resistance through strength and opposition, but survival through appeasement. I think Godo realized a similar and uncomfortable truth. It was either appear non-threatening or be exterminated. Therefore, everything in Wutai is part of a design to appear weak and accommodating, while the last surviving gems of Wutai's glorious past are tucked away behind closed doors to collect dust. At the heart of the Wutai narrative is the tension between protecting what's vulnerable and letting go of what's gone. After all, something matters more than the cultural prestige of Wutai, and that's the people. All in all, the people of Wutai live better lives than the vast majority. For Shinra, it's prestige first and people second. But Godo made a hard sacrifice, and that says a great deal about what kind of person he is. He put the well-being and livelihood of the people over the hubris of fighting viciously to the end, to self-annihilation for the sake of an ideal. Curiously, on the floor of Godo's private study lies a freshly written 4-character Chinese idiom. Literally, it means under heaven, no rivals. And traditionally, the no rivals part is meant to signify peerlessness or invincibility. But it's possible to understand these 4 characters differently. They could also mean between heaven and earth, there are no enemies. An unconventional but grammatically correct reading. Godo, sprawled out in his old age in the other room, has apparently just written these 4 ambiguous characters and left them out to dry. They can be understood in 2 completely opposite ways. Either that Godo or Wutai is unmatched, or that Godo no longer has enemies at all. Maybe he's made peace with it. You don't have to accept your enemy as your enemy. At least, not if you've turned your enemy into your benefactor. As the side quest ends, and Yuffie comes to terms with her father's decisions, she's granted the leviathan materia, Wutai's ancient deity. In one sense, she becomes the inheritor, and therefore the final protector of Wutai's lost traditions. This interpretation offers a final bit of hope. Wutai's past isn't completely destroyed, it's just sleeping. Something begins to awaken in Godo. He appears to reflect on whether all of this was worth it. And I think the answer that he comes up with is that despite the humiliation, yes, it was worth it. He does, however, understand why Yuffie wants to fight, but that's not his role. He needs to stay behind and maintain the charade to keep the peace. The lives of the people of Wutai aren't his sacrifice to make, so Yuffie goes instead.